feelings, Matt. Use the half sword, Matt. Use the half sword. Ah! My hand! Half swording with lightsabers. It's now canon. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So, for any of you who are up to date with Ahsoka, episode 4, if you're not, stop watching now, no spoilers, but I'm massively enjoying it. I was a huge fan of Star Wars Rebels, I'm a massive Star Wars geek, and I'm absolutely loving Ahsoka. I don't care what the critics say, I love it all, I think it's absolutely amazing. But what I absolutely had me jumping out of my chair this week was that half swording is now canon in Star Wars. What am I talking about? What is half swording? So if you watch this channel regularly, you almost certainly know exactly what half swording is because I've done tons of videos about it. If you're new to the channel or you've never seen me before or you've only just started watching, remember to click that subscribe button down below and watch all of my other videos. But in a nutshell, half swording is using your spare hand to support or even sometimes hold the blade in various different ways, the blade of the sword that you're using. Now it's most commonly encountered in longsword treatises, that is swords that are conventionally used gripped both at the back end, much like a lightsaber it has to be said, or even a Japanese katana. And the reasons for half swording are numerous. One of the reasons is for armoured fighting, and that is to make your blade functionally stiffer, make the point more accurate, and assist in using it as a lever in wrestling, because you can't cut through armour. You can with a lightsaber, but not with a longsword. You can't cut through armour, but you can stab into gaps. So essentially this becomes used a little bit like a bayonet on the end of a rifle, or a short spear in fact. But it is used in other situations as well. For example, even unarmoured, it is sometimes used to hook around the back of someone's neck, for example, if you've come in, or even to put your pommel around the back of the neck to perform a throw. It can be used for disarms, throwing, as I say, more accurate thrusting, pushing away, all sorts of things. So it's essentially using your sword in a slightly unconventional way, for a moment usually, in order to achieve a specific goal, either with the pointy end of the sword, the hilt end of the sword, hitting, pommeling, hooking, or indeed sometimes with the middle end of the sword, sometimes around someone's neck, or to lock up their arms, or this type of thing. So that's half swording, and it should also be mentioned, it's not only done with long swords, we even find it done with rapiers. You find it done with arming swords, you find it done with the falchion or langmesser, but clearly, with a lightsaber, we have a functional problem. I should just mention thank you to Damien Saber for sending me a pair of lightsabers, which I will be reviewing very soon, but they enable me to do this video. So clearly the problem with half swording with a lightsaber is you have a plasma blade that is going to chop your hand off. However, for all of the reasons that half swording is useful in the real world, in our world, in the Star Wars universe, it could potentially also be useful if you had some way of grabbing your own blade. Now, we could look at cortosis or various other types of materials in the Star Wars universe which are resistant to lightsaber blades. You could potentially have some type of glove or gauntlets made of that material in order to half sword. That would be a pretty cool idea. That's not what they've done. What they've done is actually so simple, I cannot believe I never thought of it before. Now, I'm not certain that this has never been done in the Star Wars universe before, maybe in now non-canon graphic novels or something, I don't know. But this is the first time I've seen it. It was in Ahsoka this week in episode 4. And she half swords. So what does Ahsoka do? Well, when she's on the back foot and being driven to the back of that precipice, she throws up her lightsaber in a parry against her opponent, and so that it doesn't collapse onto her because he's bigger and stronger and he has the high ground, he's in an advantageous position, she takes her left hand, which is often used for force pushes, pulling things, disarms, all sorts of actions here. Don't know why I'd never thought of this before, and she applies a force push to her own saber blade. Now, I think a lot of people probably didn't even notice this in the choreography, but whoever choreographed that, whoever wrote that, thank you! That is so clever and so good. I literally jumped out of my seat and shouted at Lucy, she's half swording. And this is an example of, you know, if we were using a lightsaber and someone was swinging like a poleaxe at me, indeed, we have parries that are done like this, where you support the blade. And do you know what? You also find it in Japanese martial arts. And of course, Ahsoka's weapons and the Jedi and everything else owe a lot to Japanese, you know, Bushido, essentially, Kenjutsu, Japanese martial arts. It's done in Japanese martial arts as well. So some people who go, oh, you can never half sword with a katana. Well, I'm sorry, you're wrong. If you look at Kenjutsu, there are half swording techniques with the katana. The katana has a blunt back, which in some ways makes it even easier. It's used in armoured fighting, just the same as in medieval and Renaissance Europe. And it's also used in close-in fighting, where the sword, it becomes more of a useful close-in object like this than like this. So for very similar reasons, it's used in Japanese martial arts as well as European. You incidentally also find it in Indian and Middle Eastern martial arts, African martial arts as well. It's a pretty much universal principle. So it absolutely makes sense that you would find this applied to the lightsaber, and I absolutely love the fact that she uses the Force on her own, essentially it's half swording, on her own blade in order to resist that crushing down blow that's coming in. Why have we never seen this before? We should have done. It's absolutely brilliant. So there we go. There's not an awful lot more to say about it, but massive kudos to whoever choreographed that and whoever came up with the idea. Why did I never think of suggesting that before? In all these years, decade of making videos, some of which I have talked about lightsabers and Star Wars, why did I never think about talking about half swording with a lightsaber? Because that is absolutely genius. We've seen throwing of lightsabers, which incidentally we also see with real swords in the real world. But I don't think we've ever seen half swording before. So wonderful to see. Final thing I will say, if you are a fan of Ahsoka, just a minor detail and something you might like to know is if you look at the exact design of Ahsoka's principal, her longest lightsaber, she's got a pair, one's long, one's short. So that is a clearly alluding to the Japanese daisho, the two swords, the katana and the wakizashi, or you could say the tachi and the tanto perhaps. But nevertheless, a long sword and a short sword. And that's what Ahsoka uses. Now what's interesting is the longer sword, which she only used principally in that fight, you will notice that there is an offset angle between the blade and the hilt. Now that is a hugely interesting detail. As most of you will know and be able to see, a typical medieval sword, the hilt or grip is in line with the blade. They are a straight line. This of course continues in the age of the rapier, whereby the pommel and the grip and the blade are in a straight line. However, if we come a bit later in time to Western sabers, as used in the Napoleonic Wars, for example, and later in the 19th century, we often find that the hilt actually cants forward relative to the direction of the cutting edge. So it actually tilts forward. This is for a number of reasons I've looked at in previous videos. I won't go into detail here, but this was emulated in Count Dooku's hilt on his lightsaber in Attack of the Clones and onwards, and Revenge of the Sith, and that is allegedly because Christopher Lee was a very experienced saber fencer and he wanted a hilt that was reminiscent of a fencing hilt for him. He'd done a huge number of movie fights. I think he claimed to have done the greatest number of movie sword fights of any living actor in his time. But anyway, he had a forward curving hilt. Now Ahsoka's hilt is a backwards curving hilt, and what I love about that is that shows yet again sword geekery. This actually shows someone's designed her saber and thought about that, who knows about swords. Specifically, they know about Japanese swords, because unlike a lot of modern replicas, if we look at Japanese swords, there is very often in the plane of the curve of the blade, the tsuka or handle, grip, essentially hilt, tilts backwards away from the cutting edge, and this is quite peculiar, quite unusual in fact, to Japanese swords. I won't say it's unique. In fact, the Filipino panabas is a bit like this as well, but nevertheless it is absolutely characteristic of Japanese swords. But moreover, if you look at the angle, the relatively obviously a straight blade because it's a lightsaber on Ahsoka's lightsaber, and then the very sudden tilt away in the nakago or tang or hilt in this case of her lightsaber, it is very, very like Heian era Japanese tachi. So very early period, we're talking about 10th, 11th century period, Japanese tachi. And when you look at the angles and the proportions of her sword, that is clearly, to me, what it's based on, which is absolutely fantastic. It means that, yes, it's a lightsaber, but it's inspired by real-world swords. And not only that, people are used to seeing more conventional later period Muromachi and Edo period katana and tachi, but they're not used to seeing the earlier period, you know, 1,000-year-old style tachi with this sudden kick-off angle junction between the blade and the tank. So how wonderful it is to see that in a galaxy far, far away in the hands of Ahsoka Tano. Anyway, I hope this has been an enjoyable video to watch, and I'll see you back on the channel soon. Remember to subscribe if you haven't done already. I have been Matt Easton, and I will continue to be.